Hello. Okay, so I think if you can put yourselves on mute so that we don't get any background noise, just while any other people arrive, I'm going to share this Almas quote for you to look at. And just notice what happens to you as you read this. What effect it has on your nervous system. So the Enneagram is really trying to help us to arrive at this place. Gurdjieff spoke about becoming real, and Almas is all about that as well. So what we're working towards, if we're on the Enneagram path, is this kind of state where it's not about transcendence in the way that maybe some of us, and especially me, I used to think of it as kind of exiting human experience and going into some transcendental plane. The Enneagram is rather a path of incarnation into reality, into life, into our experience, and getting very, very close to our experience, to being in closer contact with reality. And, Russ Hudson speaks about resistance. So the Enneagram is helping us to ease our resistance against our own experience. So I wanted to put this here just by way of introduction, because, as you know, the session is about changing self-experience. And how can we work with the Enneagram in a way that helps us to change our experience of ourselves? And the way I see it, and in my work, working with the Enneagram and trauma, and seeing type as a strategy that is deployed rather than a kind of existential condition. How do we cultivate a different experience of ourselves on the inside so that our type feels less necessary, so that we don't need to deploy all the resistances to reality that constitute our type? So with that mindset, this state would be the natural state, the state in the slide that Almas describes, that we're able to be fully here, fully in contact with our body, present, awake, attentive, curious, and able to experience our feelings in connection with one another, being able to be what John Key speaks about as closely coupled in the agent-arena relationship. So that's his language for being in contact with life. So the Enneagram is really helping us to do this, to be embodied, connected, relationally, somatically. And this is what we're working towards. So for me, all of my coaching with the Enneagram is about what facilitates this state. What facilitates a shift from being caught in the trance of our Enneagram type, or fixated in a particular stance towards reality that prevents us from being in contact with life. So the underlying capacity to be in contact with life is what we're trying to actually develop. We're trying to develop our inner capacity to be here and not need to do our type as compulsively as we usually do. So that's my point of departure for the session. And just as an intro, I'd like to give you an opportunity to spend a little bit of time in breakout rooms and share with one another. Let me stop sharing here so that you aren't distracted by the writing. I'm just letting someone in, and then I'll give you the prompt for the breakout. Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to talk to your colleagues in the breakout room about is, what state are you in when you don't need to do your type? So I'm asking you about, what does it feel like for you to be in a state inside yourself where you just don't need to deploy your usual type or tri-type strategy, where you're able to be with the moment on its own terms, in contact with reality and what it is asking of you, and to stay with that in a way that you don't get into your type stance because you don't need to. So that's the question. I know that Miriam just arrived. I don't know if you got the prompt. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to allocate you to breakout rooms, and I'm going to give you, let me just check how it's looking here. Okay, so I'm going to give you 15 minutes in the breakout room. And the prompt is, talk about the state that you find yourself in when you don't need to deploy your Enneagram type as a coping strategy. Is that clear? Because I'm very good at giving unclear instructions. So anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, please ask. Does this kind of make sense? Okay, great. Okay, so 15 minutes. People in groups of 3 have 5 minutes each, and a couple of pairs will have 7.5. So let me open them. See you in 15. Hi, Helena. Before you share there, Krista, I'm really glad I'm asking you to share, because generally 9s don't think that their strategy is a deployment. So I'd love to hear your findings from your conversation.
Well, we've spoken about the strategy, Andrea. This noticing of how you become invisible and how you make yourself invisible, which big time 9 strategy.
Yes.
And then, of course, this wonderful defense mechanism of just knock it. Here it goes, like zzz, buzz it down. And then a kind of a dullness that's always edged with some anxiety, because yes, I want the day to disappear and me to disappear into the day and with the day.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, it's another day, so there's that anxiety.
Yeah.
So that is there. But how the conversation was, I felt very alive in this conversation, because it was such a good conversation.
Fantastic.
And so that part, that's a big part of how it felt to have the conversation about both, about the knocking and the becoming invisible, and about the state that is not like that, which for me is a state that I feel, a state that is there when I feel completely present in my body.
Wonderful.
and specifically in my body.
Wonderful.
And I can feel my body moves around, like when you dance or when you do whatever, work in the garden or make food or even sit here and talk with your hands. And you feel completely in your body and open in the heart. And the mind is free from managing all of this.
Wonderful.
The mind is not as like, well, don't disturb that peace, make peace there. That little mood disturbance, etc., etc., etc. Your mind is free from that. And Andrew said, and then you are there. You feel you are here. You become more visible.
Yeah.
So that's it. Yeah. And I'm still sitting with this being visible thing.
Amazing.
Because you in the defended state, being visible is deeply uncomfortable, and in this state, being visible is, well, it's just visible. Here I am.
Wonderful. Yeah.
See me.
Wonderful. And I love that. And part of this work is about becoming more and more refinedly aware of the contrast between when we're in our trance and when we're not. And I love that thing of how you're emphasizing the fact that 9's ego strategy is to disappear themselves. The 9 ego strategy is an invisibility cloak. And it's how do I narcotize and how do I make myself invisible as quickly as possible?
Yeah, I think Ingrid froze.
Ingrid, we lost Ingrid.
Can you hear me? I can hear you guys saying that I've disappeared, but I'm not disappeared. Am I back? Can you hear me? Hello? So what I really liked about what you were saying, Christo, is the fact that you made it quite clear that the 9 ego strategy as a defense is a disappearance. It's like, let me disappear, let me make myself invisible, let me narcotize myself so that I'm not noticeable, present, or taking up space, not really even existing to a degree. And that, I think, is the most important thing that we're looking for here is how do we work with our clients in a way that makes it possible for them not to need to deploy that strategy? So to get back to the underlying conditions within the self that are required for us to have enough inner ease of being that we don't have to do that thing. We don't have to do our type. And I really like that way of thinking about type, rather than thinking of it as an existential condition or something that's baked into us or with an essentialist lens. To really understand that our type is a sequence of moves that we do actively as a strategy to navigate reality, to try and create certain conditions for ourselves. And there's a sensory side to it as well that we deploy. That's a whole other topic. But just as an example, 6s, for example, when they're deploying their strategy of becoming harmless and becoming compliant and becoming acceptable, blow up authority figures in their minds, project all their power onto that authority figure, and then behave accordingly. Like, you have all my power, now what do I need to do to stay safe? So that's the deployment that 6 does in order to stay safe, in order to defang someone who could be potentially dangerous. So when we start understanding type in this way as a deployment, it allows us to see, okay, so what needs to be different? for you to not have to do that? What do you need to be feeling in yourself, in your body, to not need to deploy your type defensive strategy? So I find this way of working with the Enneagram far more powerful, because it's not about criticizing the deployment. It's not about criticizing the strategy. It's about actually healing the underlying need for the strategy. So I've taken you right into the middle of trauma-informed Enneagram work, and I want to show you some more about this. So that underlying inner condition, this was my kind of cover slide. We're looking at having a stable inner home, fundamentally, is what this is about. That if we have an inner home within ourselves, where we feel that our experience of ourselves is stable and organized and safe and fairly comfortable most of the time, where we have those Enneagram virtues, equanimity, etc., then we're able to stay in a place where we're less likely to need to deploy our type strategy. So that's what we're looking at today. We're looking at self-experience. What is your experience of yourself? And the levels of health in the Enneagram refer to a kind of change in the center of gravity in your self-experience. So I want to explore a little bit more about this today. Like, what for you is a more whole and integrated experience of yourself, so that you don't need to do your type as much as you normally do. So I'm going to play you a little video here about adverse childhood experiences, because this is where our type comes from. I know it's there's the whole nature-nurture debate about type. The way I see it is based on Dan Siegel's interpersonal neurobiology, which is that we have an underlying temperamental foundation on neurophysiological kind of ground. And then on top of that, there are these neurodevelopmental pathways that get laid down. So trauma is a very significant influence on our personality type, and especially on our sense of identity. So I'm going to play a little video for you here about the ACEs, so that you can get a sense of how our embodied experience of ourself is impacted by trauma.
A child's experiences early in life are important building blocks for the developing brain. Genes, nature, are like the blueprint. They provide the basic framework for brain development. However, genes do not design the brain completely. Environmental influences, nurture, fine-tune how the brain works by shaping which brain connections get used. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent, whereas ones that do not get much use fade away. Together, genes and the environment build the foundation for all future development. Safe, stable, and nurturing relationships early in life lead to healthy development. But children's brains capture other experiences as well. Stressful events. However, not all stress is bad. Positive stress involves normal childhood experiences, like starting daycare or meeting a new person for the first time. This stress is essential for healthy development because it helps children develop coping skills and confidence. But when stress is frequent, chronic, and uncontrolled, it is toxic to children, especially when they do not have a caregiver to provide support or buffer the stress. Adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, such as abuse, neglect, exposure to intimate partner violence, parental depression or addiction, and poverty, are toxic stressors which could lead to lifelong changes in learning and behavior. ACEs early in development can impact social, emotional, and cognitive functioning, increased risk-taking behavior such as drinking and substance use, an increased risk of disease, disability, and social problems later in life. The question is, how do adverse childhood experiences impact a lifelong development? One of the most important systems in our body is our stress system. It's activated when we experience stress. We become alert, our heart rate increases, and so do our stress hormone levels, cortisol and adrenaline. Our body is ready to react, what is known as fight or flight. A short period of time after the stress is over, or if a child receives support from a caregiver, the stress response turns off and the body returns to a normal state. Adverse childhood experiences create stress responses that stay active, and without the support of a caregiver, the system has difficulty shutting off completely. This constant and prolonged activation can affect immune system functioning and increase the chances of sickness, infection, and disease. Prolonged activation of stress hormones is also toxic to the brain. Certain areas of the brain are more vulnerable to toxic stress, including the executive center or the brain's control center, an area important for solving complex problems, attention, reasoning, impulsivity, inhibition, and learning. A second area is the emotional center, the brain's alarm system, which is involved in processing and interpreting emotions and the ability to control impulses. The third area is the memory and learning center, the brain's filing cabinet, which plays a major role in learning and the formation and retrieval of memories. Science shows that adverse childhood experiences impact all of these brain centers. Behaviorally, what we begin to see is emotional distress, poor emotion regulation, greater impulsivity, learning difficulties, and physical and mental health problems. More recently, science has begun to look at how ACEs cause changes in gene expression through a process called epigenetics, which helps us understand how nature and nurture interact. Epigenetics causes changes in the way genes work without changing the DNA code itself. This occurs through chemical changes influencing how the code is used. In other words, genes are like the hardware in a computer. They determine the boundaries of what is possible. However, we need an operating system to tell the hardware what to do. Epigenetics is like the operating system directing the function of a gene's DNA hardware. The genes we are born with are the genes that we have for life, but experiences like nutrition, exercise, smoking, stressors, and relationships all affect our biology. Adverse childhood experiences are associated with epigenetic changes related to stress, brain development, cognition, and systems associated with mental and physical health. Changes that happen early in brain development are more likely to be enduring and are possibly passed on to future generations as well. The good news is that positive, supportive relationships at any stage in life can make a difference. However, supporting families and children early on will help prevent many of these negative outcomes. One of the key ingredients for healthy development is having warm, loving, and actively engaged caregivers. This involves promoting serve and return interactions, where caregivers actively and warmly engage with the child, making eye contact, responding to sounds, words, gestures, emotional needs, and sharing experiences like reading and play. Providing programs that support caregivers to strengthen these abilities are the blocks that build healthy foundations for life.
So there you have a very brief introduction to the effect of trauma on our neurophysiology. And I see trauma as a continuum between, extreme adverse childhood experiences and small t everyday trauma. And these are things that are classified as small t trauma. So these are the kind of frequent, chronic, and continuous experiences that we have in our early environments that contribute to our sense of identity and to our sense of what strategies need to be deployed when. So if you think about your strategy from an Enneagram type, tri-type, and instinct perspective, how is that a way of compensating for your experiences of small t trauma? So most of my Enneagram teaching is about this and looking at this and looking at what the underlying heart wounds, lost childhood messages, all of those features of the Enneagram, the object relations that contribute to us needing a particular strategy as a defensive maneuver. So these are the kinds of things that do affect our sense of identity, affect our ability to be in contact with the world, to be in contact with other people, to feel close, to feel confident, to be able to be in our body and do the things we want to do, to have a sense of agency and connectedness with our own life force. So until we start to heal our experience of ourselves, we're going to continue to deploy these strategies because our bodies think that they're still happening. When we're triggered, it's our primitive brain that doesn't know that we're an adult in the room able to handle the situation that we're facing. There are parts of us that are really convinced that we're still 3 years old. And if you know anything about something like IFS, internal family systems, or hypnotherapy, where we do inner parts work, we know that our defensive strategies are protective parts that think we are still children, that we are still going to be experiencing these things as if we are a little child. There's a part of us that maybe feels incredibly helpless or vulnerable. And that's the part that would need that protective strategy to jump in. So just laying that foundation in terms of understanding that there's a trauma component to our self-experience, that our self-experience, our sense of identity, our ability to be in our own skin and at ease with ourselves is affected by trauma. So the other aspects of things that I would call self-experience are a sense of inner organization, that when I have a feeling, I know it's a feeling, I know it's my feeling, and I know that I have the capacity to tolerate that feeling, and it's going to flow through me, and it's going to pass. If I don't have a sense of inner organization, then I don't know what to do with my feelings. They're completely overwhelming. I feel dysregulated, and I can't make head or tail of my own experience. I just have to go into either fight, flight, freeze, fawn, one of the defensive strategies, because the feelings are too overwhelming. So that's what happens when we get triggered. We don't have a sense of inner organization. And then that dysregulation as well, that's part of that. So for self-experience, it's those are the features. It's about feeling stable, regulated, in contact with one's aliveness and present. So having laid the trauma foundation aspects of self-experience, let's just look at some of the things that are triggers in Enneagram language. I mean, not triggers, the kind of side effects of having a negative self-experience, of not being at ease within oneself. So when we are in our type, and when we need our type, and when we're deploying that strategy, and it's the one-size-fits-all strategy, that no matter what the situation is, I'm doing 7. You just, that's how it is around here, then we do our type strategy in a very fixed way. So I've put a box around this picture. It's from the cover of a Deirdre Fane book called Becoming Safely Embodied. Because when we are not safely embodied in ourselves, we can have this feeling of not being real, of being fragmented, of not knowing who we are. But that is also a fixed identity in many ways. So even though it feels diffuse and it feels insubstantial for somebody, or it feels, on the other hand, it can feel very rigid and armored. it's characterized by fixity. And that's what Naranjo was really trying to point out in the Enneagram, is that our defensive patterns, our Enneagram type, is a rigidified defense mechanism that we then get stuck in because we learn it so thoroughly in early childhood as this is the way to do things. This is the best way to be. Like say for an Enneagram 2, the best way to be around here in my early childhood context is to make sure that I stay focused on that person's needs because they're the center of this little system and everything revolves around them because of some kind of pathology. Either they're an alcoholic or a narcissist or whatever it is. But in the early life of an Enneagram 2, it's pretty standard in my experience of the childhood patterns of clients that they had to be in orbit of somebody and not have needs. So they learn the strategy of not having needs and being in orbit of other people, that they don't really exist, only other people exist, and that their way of staying safe is to keep all eyes on someone else's needs. That then becomes a fixed habit that gets deployed every time the person feels slightly insecure. Deploy the 2. This is the fail-safe strategy. We're just going to do 2 because that's something we know how to do. We're good at it. Our whole sensory biology is wired that way. We've got a hyper-attunement. We've developed these finely tuned skills to be able to notice other people's feelings. We pay all our attention is on everyone else, and we notice other people's needs because that's what we learned. So looking at these things as a fixity in response that was incredibly adaptive early on, but then has a huge cost later. And the cost is the self-disconnection, the lack of attunement to oneself, this autopilot. It also comes with all kinds of cognitive distortions. We know with the Enneagram types, all the self-sabotage that goes along with it. And as we heal our experience of ourselves and our ability to connect with ourselves, to have our own feelings, to be embodied, to be connected with our own life force, then we start being able to experience a healthy adult version of ourselves, where we're actually able to be here. But it's a very, very different process to criticizing the Enneagram ego strategy, to pointing out any of these things. No, it's like, yeah, we know that, but talking about the side effects of our reality strategy, talking about the side effects of our defense mechanisms, doesn't help us really to ease them. It can help us to notice, oh, I was overdoing that thing. But that's kind of super ego realization is not going to unlock a different experience of the self. What we're really going for here is to become safely embodied. And that's why I chose this picture from Deirdre Fay's book. Here it is at the bottom here, the footnote. Becoming Safely Embodied, Deirdre Fay. She's a wonderful, wonderful teacher. And there are a bunch of YouTube videos of her talking about the work that she does, the trauma healing work, and also interviewing some amazing other therapists about this exact topic. So when we become safely embodied, our self-experience changes. We feel more grounded. We have a greater sense of agency. So a lot of things become unlocked through this process of healing the underlying neurophysiological impacts of trauma. And when that happens, we just don't need to deploy our time as much as we once did. So I would like to stop talking so much and stop for a second and ask if anybody here would be comfortable sharing any change that they have experienced in terms of becoming safely embodied. I know that there are a lot of people here who've worked with various healing modalities and, somatic work, breathing, whatever. I would be really grateful if anyone would be comfortable sharing with us any aspect of their journey of what does it feel like to move from here to there? What changed? What changed for you? I can certainly share mine if no one else feels comfortable, but it would be great to hear from someone other than me. Anyone put your hand up if you're comfortable sharing? Thanks, Miriam.
I was talking about that earlier. So as we develop, and if we look at our profile and our developmental and maturity, I feel like I have completely changed. I no longer I was assessed as a 2, and I feel like I could see many times in my 71 years of how I did things. But in the last, I don't know how many years, I don't have that experience of myself that I need to be liked by anyone. It's okay for people not to like me, and I laugh about that. I recall times where I would do so much. And this winter, my daughter said to me, I don't like the new you. I liked the old one much better, where you did, where you helped out so much with boys and whatever it is. And I laugh about it. But the reality of it for me today is what works for me. What are my needs that I never really looked at throughout my life? And as a result, I've also changed who I'm friends with and who I hang out with and who I communicate with and all of that. It's been an amazing evolution for me.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit more sense of the embodied experience of that. People can understand the kind of descriptions of how it might look, but what does it feel like to be inside your body, looking out of your eyes?
It feels freer. It feels I have far more room to breathe. And one of the things for me is it used to feel like I had a hairball in my throat when I felt that I really wanted to do something and people didn't understand me. And I would be like, oh, and they didn't want to hear me because whatever the stories I had. And it's like that hairball is gone. It's like I say what there is to say without a concern. I mean, I'm not rude or nasty or, I feel, but I don't, like, my body feels freer, more open, and my throat. And nowadays, when I feel like I can't breathe really well, I look at what has just occurred in the last day or today, or what are my thoughts. And it's always something related to that. So where it's really most noticeable is in my breathing and my throat.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's really helpful to kind of imagine ourselves into that experience of like a hairball in one's throat. And I'm kind of picking up implicitly that if you aren't saying what you need or listening to your own needs, that happens.
Yes. And it's interesting because I'm coaching 3 women, and they're all from Latin America, and all 3 of them are 8s. And all 3 came to me because of their voice.
Oh, wow.
They felt like they couldn't be heard. They felt immigrants, refugees, or whatever their circumstances. And I've been working on that with them. But ever since I've been studying the Enneagram, I could see the relationship of their voice feeling shut down in some way or another.
Mm.
So I'm starting to notice that and the trauma of it. So and how we need to nurture it so much more.
Wow, that's incredible. And it's just such a powerful example of the degree to which our type is somatic. That's being able to speak our truth without fear of consequence in a way that is necessary, kind, helpful. It passes through all the filters, as you say, of not being rude or nasty, but actually being able to be in ourselves with a kind of grounded confidence enough to be assertive. And
yes, yeah. And there's one more thing. My daughter is assessed as a 6, and for the longest time, and she has terrible stomach issues. And for the longest times, and she goes on these new microbiome diets and everything. And I recently said to her, it has nothing to do with your diets. And she hasn't quite gotten that. And I'm trying to explain to her to pay attention to when she gets anxious and what goes on and what conversations she's having and how that affects her stomach. So I've recently asked her to keep like a diary for data to see when her stomach hurts and what occurred just before that in her work environment. So it should be an interesting thing to see how that really affects her stomach, or if my theory is right.
Yeah, I would hypothesize for sure that, that's what we see. Type is carried in the body.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for that, Miriam. And I love that you emphasize the freedom that comes with it. And the thing that popped instantly to mind is the holy freedom, the holy idea of 2. The Enneagram 2, when one is released from all enslavement to one's own expectations of a particular response from anybody, that when one is acting from within oneself rather than in a transactional expectation, that's the definition of holy freedom. And then you start being able to go down to the holy origin of 4, that you being in the world with a sense of being of holy origin is that you have an essential consciousness and being, and life is touching you in unique ways. And that is an immensely creative process that is kind of an unfolding of selfhood in contact with the world. And there's no manipulation. There's no necessity to manipulate, because when one experiences oneself as being of holy origin, then you don't need to earn love from anybody. You don't need anybody to like you. If they don't like you, that's their movie. It's like, okay, well, here I am. I occurred to you in this way, and you don't like me for whatever reason. I don't even need to guess. It's not my business.
Yeah.
And being able to stay in that stream with full generosity of heart and with the attunement that you learned and with care, and it's an abundance of love. There's nothing compromised there, but there's holy freedom, because you're not doing it to get your fix. You're not doing it to feel okay. You're not doing it because you're trying to prevent being re-traumatized by whatever rejection or invalidation or misattunement you may have experienced as a child.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for your example and for that word free. It's a huge one. And then, Susan, you had your hand up. I'd love to hear what you were going to say. And I'm sorry I took so long to get to you, but I wanted to track Miriam's example and everything that it offered to us.
Yeah, no, that was wonderful. And as a fellow 2, I could resonate with so much, and I find, the double whammy of the social 2, and then, again, a mixture of the different types who's talking to that. Yeah, I love that piece and the piece there at the end, on the freedom piece, the holy ideas. In my experiences and my journey, it's been interesting. It's like more and more, and with the work that I've done with the Enneagram and growth and things, I felt less like a 2. And times I'm like, am I quote this 2? Because it's like I am with things differently, hold things differently, hold things lighter. I've found my voice, didn't have a voice for so long. So I can identify that with Miriam. And years ago, I was in therapy for many years. It was a difficult, time, relationship and such, and could meander and talk on a lot of things. But when a therapist would ask me for years, what do you want? I would just babble. I could not answer that. Had no idea. And now I then have since learned, that's often for 2s. So, and I resonate with the front piece of what you have said on that, the adverse childhood reaction, ACEs, yeah. Because I think I came from an unhealthy 2 mom, and I've got 2s in my family, different sisters and things. So for me, in my journey, what has helped me is working on presence, really into the present and not into the future or into the past. It's been part of that movement. And that inquiry into self, being in nature, I'm in nature a lot. As a former landscape designer, studied it. I just naturally went to it for healing, and it's become so much more. The Enneagram has been huge in that, also for myself and for my relationships. So holding things lighter, not being afraid to use my voice. My kids, when I first divorced, it was like walking on eggshells. They didn't want me to speak. And then later it was like, Mom, we need your voice. Because I had learned to stand and speak more authentically and what was coming up for me. And it was like, and knowing they needed that was such a gift to me. So I've been gifted in many different ways, in those growths. So
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's so amazing that we're going down this voice path. I love it. It's so wonderful, because I work with voice in my programs. Our voice is a biometric identifier. It's completely unique. And there's quite a lot of research on how hearing one's own voice in song is actually really good for the immune system. So there's some very interesting research on voice. And one of my colleagues and co-facilitators, a guy named Rob Hutchinson, has done a ton of work on ancient Egyptian mythology and is actually starting a wonderful wisdom school where he's bringing all the Enneagram wisdom from ancient Egypt into the modern day teachings. And he speaks about how in the afterlife in ancient Egypt, part of the mythology is that you were judged on whether or not you spoke with true voice. And that is the greatest honor that could be given to somebody, is if I said, yes, I know Susan, she speaks with true voice. That is almost our highest good, and our spiritual duty is to learn to speak with true voice. And what does that mean for each of us? But what experience do we need to have of ourselves to be able to make that true? Like, how do we need to be feeling about ourselves to be able to speak from a place of deeply grounded, authentic integrity, where we are not lying to ourselves? We're not pretending to anyone else either. And if you look around the Enneagram at all the ways in which we lie to ourselves, that's one way of understanding the Enneagram, is there 9 ways of lying to ourselves. And, all of the anti-self actions are a way of lying to ourselves. If I think of 7, self-symbolization is the ways in which, one of the ways in which 7s lie to themselves. They imagine themselves to be abstract, an idea, rather than what am I actually experiencing in the here and now. No. For each different type, there are multiple layers of illusion and lies. We've got the lies, the traps, the anti-self action. For each of the types, it's basically describing all the ways in which we lie to ourselves and identify with things that aren't us. So this journey that you're both talking about, a journey back to true voice, is so unbelievably profound. But I couldn't say to you, Susan, speak with true voice. Stop lying to yourself. There were other conditions that had to be created in yourself to even know that it was possible. Your experience of being you in 3D, in your body, probably had to undergo a long journey before you noticed yourself being able to speak in true voice. So I'm latching on to something you said. I'd love to hand it back to you and hear, if I'm on the right track, or what any response that you hear, that you feel to what I'm saying.
No, this so resonates, and I feel that part of that journey of getting to being able to stand in voice and have voice, and that true voice, it is picking up the pieces from around the Enneagram app in each one of those. I was just thinking about this morning. I was doing this practice from something else where you look at a picture of yourself when you're very young, and then you think of yourself now, or however you were, before 5 or whatever, and the words came up. This is before we had the layers of life and experiences. This is like, I could feel that younger self of courage, I could feel that younger self of joy. I could feel, I could feel, the caring. I could feel the adventure. I could feel the different pieces at that younger point, and then losing it. And then it's like coming back to those. It's like coming back to those pieces.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you. So that's the journey of self-recovery, that you can experience parts of yourself that you maybe thought were lost, or that you forgot about, that you didn't know you forgot about. That's what I'm kind of hearing. And I know Julia uses the metaphor of parts we've traded in or amputated. In Lawrence Heller, they speak about shame-based identifications, where there are parts of ourselves we just need to disavow because it wasn't safe to express them. So, Susan, you wanted to say something?
I often use the expression, remembering to remember.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's sad. Part of this work with the Enneagram, when we work with it in this way, is very painful, because we at some level in healing trauma get to acknowledge the deficits in our early holding environment, where we realize that part of our type strategy is deployed as a compensation for holes and gaps and deficits in our care and the attunement of our caregivers, the presence, the holding. So I'm going to get to that in a second, but I want to, before I do that, I want to ask you, Kathy, you were going to say something, and I see you put your type in the name piece. I don't usually let people do that, because I want us to be with each other as people first, and Enneagram way in the background. But I invite you to share what you wanted to say earlier.
Well, I was going to double down on some of the 2 topics, but I know you want to move on. I'm happy to share my embodied experiences. I've been in my own transformation, but if you'd prefer to move on, we can do that.
It would be wonderful for us if you can take us into that experience.
Yeah. So the way the 2 showed up for me was a variation on the theme for Miriam and Susan. The way it shows up for me is a really deep compulsion to please, to stay safe. It's sort of a not, so it accesses my 2, my 6, and I'm like vigilantly pleasing other people in order to stay safe. It used to be that I avoided conflict. I've done a lot to improve there. And as I've been working with a trauma coach very specifically, who specializes in somatic trauma work, I have become deeply aware of the way the compulsion to please shows up in my body. And it's an increased heart rate. It's a compulsion to move, to act, to do something. I'm in an unconscious need to do, and it's very much about pleasing the other person. So I recognize a lot of the I don't know what I own, what I want kind of things, because I was so vigilant about making sure the other person's needs were met. And I didn't even know what those needs were. I just made assumptions about what those needs were. And I would try to please along that line. And as I've done a lot of my personal work in this domain, I've noticed that the compulsion is a lot less strong. The heart rate, I can notice it, and then I can be with it. I can tolerate the discomfort of wanting to please other people without actually needing to take action. And so a lot of my work has been recognizing what the somatic impulse is, and then being with that impulse and not acting. So that's been a little bit of my journey, to the extent that's helpful.
Thank you. Oh, wow, that is treasure. That is absolute gold. I just feel like handing over to you, make you co-host and give you my slides, because you're saying exactly the whole thing. This is exactly it. That's why the emphasis for me is on embodied in the body, the somatics, the neurophysiology of our time. That, you know, if you were to go back and notice the precursors to doing too, it's like, something happens, then your heart goes, and then there's this overwhelming compulsion to do something. And what you were saying there is, you don't know what you want. You don't have a clue. It's not even, oh, I'm just going to put my needs aside. They don't come into the picture. That's what people don't understand. So if you say to an Enneagram 2, you know, you've got to care about your needs, it's like another planet. They don't know how to do that. Which is why the somatic work is so important, because you've got to get behind to that point of when the strategy kicks in, what's going on in your body. And then you were talking about that thing of tolerating the discomfort. And that's what the healing journey is about, is how do I tolerate the heart wound? How do I tolerate the discomfort in myself that makes me need to do my time? And when we're able to tolerate that suffering and the intensity of that emotional driver, whether it's shame or terror or whatever it is, that we can stay with it long enough to not do our time. That's what we're looking for here. And all the trauma healing work, the contemporary trauma work, Bessel van der Kolk, especially wonderful, groundbreaking around distress tolerance. He says, if we can tolerate our distress, we don't need therapy, because then we're kind of getting by. We're going about our day and bad things happen and people treat us badly, but we can kind of deal with it, you know. I don't know if I'm still sharing my screen, but I'm going to put up this. Can you see Peter Levine's curve here? You're seeing the graph. So what we're looking at here is about distress tolerance. So when our normal nervous system activation, like you saw in that little movie, we get activated and we get hyper aroused, or our nervous, you know, we get all scared or whatever happens, and then it subsides. Depending on our degree of traumatization, we go into hyperactivation, hyperarousal, like continuous stress response. Like if you're a 612 or a 216, you're just constantly in hyperdrive, efforting, fixing yourself, trying to be better, complying, fawning, whatever it is. So then you're in a kind of complex post-traumatic stress activation where you never get a break from that, and your inner critic is driving you relentlessly. On the other hand, if you've had stress that's led you into a shutdown, then you can be dissociated and numb. So you can have more of a withdrawn dissociative response. But either way, you're not really in your aliveness. And what we're trying to do with this work is increase the window of tolerance so that when we have a stressful experience, like I don't know what kind of thing might trigger the deployment of your Enneagram 2 or historically, but to not have these small experiences trigger our early childhood flashbacks in such a way as we have to do our time. So, for example, what I'm hearing there, Kathy, is with the somatic work, you've increased your window of tolerance. So what used to take you out of the ability to hold it together into 2 land, I just have to do 2 because I can't cope otherwise. Now you're able to stay in the window of tolerance. And it's like, damn, this is bloody uncomfortable. All I want to do is do the thing. And I'm maybe just not going to do it for the next 5 minutes, the next 30 seconds. And then that wave of compulsion passes. And gradually we start finding out, oh, this is actually me. I don't need to do that thing all the time. And when you spoke about, you don't know what you want, when you get the compulsive rush of 2, the trance of 2 takes over. That's called false valuation in 2. And what it is that loss of contact with your truth, your true voice, your true authentic self-expression in the world from a place of inner groundedness, from that holy origin place of true voice. From that place, you're able to choose. This is what's good. This is what's important. This is how I'm going to engage my life force. But you can't do that if your mind is hijacked by the false valuation of other people's approval. So I'm just hearing also, again, the freedom that comes from healing your self-experience to the point that I have the capacity to tolerate my own distress under conditions that otherwise would have done the tripwire of setting my whole type strategy in motion. So I see you nodding, smiling. I'm just wondering what's kind of going on for you as I'm rambling on about this stuff.
It's feeling very familiar. It's reminding me of the work that I did with the therapist. He talked about the zone of tolerance quite a bit, and he was very sensitive to when there was too much, and I would sort of spin out, or my overflow would be to go numb, instead of hyperactive. In the therapeutic environment. And then there were other times when we would notice if we weren't like, it's sort of, I think about like you hold the flame close enough that you feel the heat, but you're not burning. It's not so far that you don't feel the heat. It's not so close that you're burning, but you're right in that zone where you can feel the heat and you can be with the heat. I don't know, that's a bizarre metaphor, but that's
really great. The other day we were talking about creating heat experiences for our clients. And that's so important if we practitioners is how much heat, because we want the client to experiment with something new, that to have the opportunity to experiment with something new when their type's about to kick in, but we don't want to throw them into dysregulation or shame them, because if we plunge them deeply into a kind of expectation that they're going to tolerate more heat than they're ready for, they're going to feel shamed and invalidated. And really, you can really re-traumatize somebody that way. So I love your metaphor, but it sounds as though that experience was very healing for you in being able to experience just enough of the triggers to do your type and then build your confidence that, oh, I didn't do it and the world didn't end. Oh, I didn't do it again and the world didn't end. This is actually feeling really great. And then at some point, like, why the hell was I doing that? But it does take that distress tolerance is the absolute foundation of it all. But I wanted to come back. You mentioned the word numbing as a strategy, like shut down and more of the zoning out type of way of coping. Is there anything more you want to say about that? because for me, that sounds like a deployment of 9. You know, it's like, okay, now I just need to zone out, or I just need to make myself like more of a freeze response. It's like sounds more 6-ish and 9-ish, if I'm allowed to have any opinion at all.
Yeah, you're allowed. I think that's a really astute observation that I had never put together. The very first time I took Enneagram, I came out as a type 9, and I worked a lot on my ability to engage in constructive conflict as a coach. I thought it was an important skill for me to be able to develop on myself. And it might help to explain a little bit about the trauma without making it too much about me. I grew up the child of a father who demonstrates a lot of narcissistic behavior and who demonstrated a lot of rageaholic behavior. So I was constantly trying not to provoke him as a strategy to stay safe. And so I think the 9 is a very natural place for me to go in a stressful environment. And I do go to shut down because I just need to make myself small to protect myself from, physical harm and emotional harm. So that's where it came from.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that, because it really does help us understand. And even in your gesture, is I'm going to make myself small and kind of not provoking, not triggering anything, as harmless as possible. Maybe I'm just going to be sweet and charming, or I'm going to be, whatever I need to do to basically maintain the goodness of the caregiver. That's what we try and do as children. We can't tolerate the idea that our parents are bad people. We've got to see them as good, and then we've got to behave in a way that brings out their goodness. I mean, there's a lot of depth in the theory around this. I can't really go into it, but the choice between attachment and authenticity, attachment always wins. This is Gabor Mate's kind of big contribution.
Oh no, Ingrid froze again. Oh, there, you're back.
Yeah. So in the kind of trade-off between attachment and authenticity, attachment always wins. So if we have to have a relationship with our caregivers, it's not an option. We can't move out when we're 3 years old, much as we'd like to. We have to be there, and we have to adapt to the context. So if it means being small, harmless, sweet, anticipating everybody's needs, then that's what we're going to do. And we become very good at it. So, yeah, thank you for that description. It's really, really helpful, because then there's no way we're going to shame that strategy. There's no way we're going to sit as a coach and say, Kathy, you really need to think about pride. It's actually just completely off track to go that way. If we can work with our clients, as you did with your somatic therapist, to build your capacity to be connected enough with yourself, first of all, to notice the change in your heart rate. That's step 1, is the compassionate self-inquiry, to be able to be with the body and like, whoa, I can feel it kicking in. And to be self-compassionate about that, to not instantly do what compliance types would do, like, get over yourself, their needs are important, ignore this. Or if it were an 8, to ignore the somatic signals and just go into, combat mode or whatever it is. So being able to develop the self-attunement as part of our self-experience, to say, okay, I can feel it kicking in. I can feel, for one, maybe tensing of the jaw and the neck, and frustration, anxiety for the head types, and various flavors of anxiety, from existential horror to whatever other flavor is there. All the different instincts and the subtypes that have particular triggers and flavors of their core suffering. But the self-experience change is being able to tolerate that differently. And then when we're tolerating that distress and we don't have to do our time, then we don't have to experience all the consequences of overdoing our type in every situation. And all of us have all of the things on the left as consequences, if not more. I just put some of them here. The slide is from a leadership program that I'm going to be doing. But there's also illness, things like nervous autoimmune things. These are some of the other consequences of trauma that we carry. And when our trauma is unhealed, we're going to be unconsciously doing a whole bunch of stuff to alleviate that suffering. I'll show you some of these. These are more behavioral. So if you look at these are all of these are aspects of different types in one way or another. So it's not a one-to-one relationship, but we can say, oh, okay, let's start with loss of safety. Who experiences a loss of sense of safety? So definitely 8s, definitely 6s, definitely 7s, definitely 5s. So that would be, if I'm a type that has experienced the kind of trauma that has resulted in a loss of safety, anything that triggers that, I'm going to deploy my strategy straight away. In my case, it's 794. So that's what I deploy. When in doubt, deploy 794. So that would be a combination of hyping things up, making things fun, being sweet, being incredibly conciliatory. So no good boundaries at all. Because if somebody treats me badly, I'd rather be sweet and conciliatory and funny and friendly, like, oh, never mind, let's just go and have some fun. Meantime, something has happened and I ignore it. So, yeah, these things, when we start understanding trauma responses and the underlying suffering behind these things, like reenactment, we start understanding what type really is. What type really is at the level of my type is an attempt to alleviate my distress, which is based in my trauma history. Like, why else would we do it? It's because of this triggering of our earliest sense of insecurity. And these are some of the things that I've got in my trauma course, where I've matched a lot of the trauma theory, specifically NAM, the neuroaffective relational model, that is very much a bottom-up and top-down approach. So it's got the somatic side as well as the object relations and all of that. Is how are we acting out the deficits in our early holding in the object relations of our type? So those of you who know the object relations will know exactly what I'm talking about, but it's an aspect of the Enneagram that looks at our core underlying emotion of our type. So for 7, 1, and 4, for example, the core underlying emotion is a frustration with our early caregivers. For the 9, the 3, and the 6, it's an attachment wound of feeling like we had something and then we lost it. So how do we get back that attachment? And for the 8, the 2, and the 5, we're talking about a rejection wound of feeling like our needs aren't going to be met, or we're not really wanted, we're not loved. So the object relations tell us something about the deficits in our early holding environment. The heart wounds in the Enneagram, and there's a heart wound that's named by Russ Hudson for each of the types, tell us something about the ways in which our caregivers were misattuned, where they didn't see us, where they didn't ask us, what do you need today, Kathy? What do you feel like doing? What would be a nice way for you to spend the day? Your dad saying to you, what do you feel like doing? And if you said, I'd love to go for a walk in the forest or whatever, that he would say, great. And you'd be able to go on the walk and you wouldn't be afraid that for some reason at any moment he might lose his shit and terrify the living hell out of you. Because rageaholics are not predictably rageaholics generally. They are volatile and unpredictable. So everything can be all lovely and you feel like the person's attuned and you're having a lovely time, and next thing they're losing their shit. And depending on the degree of rageaholicism, or whatever what the word is, that can, it's going to feel life-threatening at the best of times to a tiny person. But sometimes it's extreme, Someone running around the house with guns, throwing furniture. So, I kind of have some horror stories of my own about having a dangerous, unhinged parent running around the house. So, the combination of the lack of safety and then the ruptures in attunement is incredibly dysregulating. And also then there's the internalized shame of what's wrong with me, that I'm unlovable. So those things also are part of the deal. And then the lack of guidance and loss of orientation that comes with the lost childhood messages. So the Enneagram describes so many aspects of trauma that affect our ability to be safe in ourselves, that give us a sense of not having a stable inner world where we can have our feelings, where we know this is my feeling, it happened because of that, I'm triggered, I can hold it, and I can choose wisely how to respond to that thing in a way that is looking after myself, is truthful, is kind. So there's that equanimity that we have to regain through healing these things. And then our state increasingly becomes one of equanimity and balance, feeling grounded in ourselves. And the way I like to depict this is using the CYBAM model, Peter Levine, where we go, let me just put it there, where we go from a state of inner disorganization and fragmentation to a state of inner coherence. So this is the journey of healing. It's not a behavioral path. It's not, okay, Kathy, now you're my coachee and we're going to work on setting boundaries. That's not the starting point at all. The starting point is, how are you before your heart starts beating like that? How are you when you feel that you've got the resources and the capacity to hold that heartbeat? And that's this journey here, is from being in a state where you are triggered and fragmented in your psyche, like this first image here, to a state where you actually feel integrated and whole, where you're able to discern in yourself that you have needs. You're able to notice, okay, clenched gut, hairball in throat, tight chest, whatever it is, like my type is triggered in different ways. Everything looks white. I feel disoriented. My mouth gets dry. I kind of feel a bit dizzy, and I'm totally ungrounded. I'm not in my body. And there's a kind of panic in my solar plexus and my gut. So that's me in my dysregulated state. And then that's when I will for sure do 7. I'll be trying to listen to 2 different podcasts at the same time as working on a piece of writing and panicking that I can't. And that's not something you can manage. It's about, I'm so dysregulated that I'm just doing it. I'm fragmented. So different people's experience of that state is going to look different. But fundamentally, what it's characterized by is being triggered by something that's about the past fear or a past anxiety that is triggering a certain way of thinking, a certain way of feeling, sensations. And the reason this is all messed up relative to the other one, which looks like this, is that nothing is in its right place. So, for example, one of my favorite examples is, say, Enneagram 6. So Enneagram 6 is sitting in a meeting, and then the boss walks in, say a 6-1-2, compliance-oriented type, triple stuff with authority figures and power and feeling safe. So the person walks in, instantly the images and thoughts in one's mind are pretty much like a flashback. So for a 6, an authority figure is much larger than life. 6s kind of have a movie in their head where their boss is very big. They're not a normal sized person. 6s have projected all their power onto this figure, and there's a lot of visual and auditory stuff going on in sixes' minds. Their minds are very busy with the kind of horror fantasies. And they don't realize it because that's part of their strategy, is to know that there's this looming authority figure and they better watch out for them. So the images and thoughts in their head about this, the way the six's mind is hijacked, lead to the feelings of anxiety and feeling small and obsequious, and how do I please this person, and I'm just going to agree with everything they say, and I'm going to go to them after the meeting and say how wonderful they are as a boss, and what can I do to help them. And there are a whole lot of things that kick in because of these feelings. The feelings trigger these kinds of behaviors. So when we have the thoughts and the feelings and the behaviors all triggered by some aspect of our trauma, then we're going to do our type, then we're doing our subtype. And we're going to have all the somatic sensations, probably very similar to what we had when we were 3 or 4 or 5 years old. But we quickly overlay our type strategy on those feelings so we don't have to feel them. So this is what it looks like when we triggered into the trance of our type, when our trance is activated and we deploy the behavioral strategy. And then we're going to have the meaning that we're going to attribute to ourselves in that state is going to be very distorted as well by the feelings and the behaviors and the sensations. So we might be sitting there feeling useless. We've made a mistake. We're so pathetic at our job. Look how everyone else is, or anger, or whatever the meaning we attribute from within the distorted lens of our type. All of it gets deployed, every bit of it. So this is what happens to us when we're in the state of a kind of inner incoherence that is based on a trigger from the past. So when we triggered, this whole thing, a whole sense of self breaks, and we are thrown into the coping strategy that we developed as our type. We deploy our type. That was literally the only thing we had available to us when we were little. We practiced it more and more and more until it became very easy to deploy. And when we triggered, we do it again. So this picture, one of the best ways I find of reminding myself how it works is if you think about post-traumatic stress, like a Vietnam War veteran, one of those typical stories, and Bessel van der Kolk uses this story, is, the person sitting in a coffee shop in, downtown Boston, and a car backfires. So they have the sensation, the auditory sensation is coupled with the memory from the past. And instead of the person being able to stay in themselves because they're safely embodied, that thing immediately goes to, I'm in the trauma. And it's happening to me right now. And so the meaning attributed is, I'm in the middle of a war. Someone's just dropped a bomb. I'm terrified out of my wits. I jump under the table. And in my mind, they're soldiers. I'm having a flashback. So this kind of very well describes a trauma flashback state. So in PTSD like that, it's a very extreme and obvious example. But if you think about our personality style, like an Enneagram 6 in the boardroom is kind of having a mini flashback when the boss walks in. And they're not acting as an adult in the room. They're going to be acting as their 6-year-old self with their fake persona to cope with the feelings of that 6-year-old. And then what happens when we heal our self-experience and we start becoming safely embodied is that things start feeling a lot more organized. Then we're able to experience the sense of inner stability, and all the virtues in the Enneagram describe a state of stability and balance. We're not going from one extreme to the other. We're not going from, say, as a 2, the rage of 8, where it's like, exploding in a different way and feeling dysregulated in a different way, or collapsing into the 2, or like the extreme version of 4 either. But being able to stay in oneself with the humility of, I'm a person having difficult feelings and I don't feel safe or loved, and that feels really shit, and I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm just going to feel shit. I'm just going to feel my painful feelings and hold them. And this is the person, and it shouldn't be such a linear image. But when one is able to stay in the virtue of time, for 7, not having to do the gluttony, being able to stay with the suffering of the panic of 7, stay with it, hold it, not do 7, just sit in that and not have to do anything. Being able to hold that sobriety of being, the frontal lobe is online, and no, I don't have to do that thing this time. I don't have to do that reckless and impulsive thing. The same way as for 2, I don't have to kick straight into that action of pleasing somebody or whatever. So when I talk about healing self-experience, this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about more and more of the time experiencing one's presence, one's agency, one's ability to hold the feelings, and even, the experience of having those sensations. There's just more of a buffer. There's more of a tolerance for all of this. So I want to stop here. There's so much more we could go into. I mean, this is like, I have a 6-month course on all of this stuff. So much about it. But and for each type, there's a journey, of becoming safely embodied, of handling these triggers. They're very different for each type. Like I was describing for the 7, it's not that heart beating and I have to do something. It's a different kind of sensory experience of losing touch with reality completely. And all of us are going to be doing that in different ways. So let me stop here. We're coming close to ending time, and I want to hear more from you and what you're taking away. And I've been a little bit all over the place today. I haven't had a very structured session. So let me stop and hear. What are you hearing? And maybe if we've got any other 2s, since we're learning a lot about 2, what's landing for you? Maybe you can really take away from the session something about the inner life of our 2s, or anyone with a 2 feeling style. Anyone want to say something? Any questions? Anything you want to clarify? Jump in, anybody.
I'll ask a question. First of all, hi Ingrid, my name is Vicki, and hello to everyone. This has been a really interesting session today. It's been really fascinating to better understand the 2. So I want to thank the 2s for sharing. I was just with my sister for several days, and she is deeply within her 2. And I also happen to be a type 8, so I'm regularly using the 2 as my line of integration, looking to that type for more balance. So it's all very thought-provoking. I had a question going back to something you had said very early on in this session around, I'm kind of taking it at face value, so I was up in the air as to whether I should even ask it, but here we go. You had mentioned something on the lines of talking about the side effects. So when we talk about the side effects of our fixity, we're not going to really unlock a ton. So sure, we can talk about, like you said, the side effects, but it isn't until we actually like safely embody, becoming safely embodied, you had mentioned.
Yeah.
Until we can do this, we're not going to be able to get
Yeah.
traction. So I just wanted to get some clarity around that, because I think a lot of us are doing team Enneagram work, bringing it into corporations or otherwise. And how do we ensure that we're not just talking about the side effects, and that we can actually make this transformative change for others and ourselves?
100%. Yeah, so this is one of the reasons that I do this work, is because the Enneagram provides us with so much content and so much fine analysis of our ego type and the cost and the problems and what it looks like, and the impact on other people. So we spend a lot of time analyzing the ego, but not a lot of time creating the conditions for it to ease. So really, that's the focus of my work, is training coaches to work with the easing. So for me, number one is unshame the ego. Unshame. The ego is a deployment, it's a strategy, it's a coping style. It worked brilliantly. It was the best possible thing you could ever have done. It's a piece of genius. So just validate it end to end. It is highly intelligent, and it's just a little bit outdated. And the only problem is that it doesn't always work. The biggest problem is that it mostly works. That we see, okay, this is mostly okay. And because it's got built-in defense mechanisms, I've got my whole spiel here. You can take a screenshot of my Enneagram one-page solution to existence. That the Enneagram tells us everything about what we do. It's got the built-in defense mechanisms that prevent us from feeling our pain. We all justify our ego strategy, especially in the early days of working with the Enneagram. And it's our whole strategy is designed to avoid us feeling our starving heart, or our terror-stricken heart, or our stabbed heart. The whole thing is designed to avoid us feeling those things. So until we can find other ways of holding those feelings, we have to do the ego. So I find step one, unshaming, really, really important, is validating the ego with our clients and saying, this was brilliant and it's worked. It's gotten you into these freaking high profile executive roles where you're managing billions of dollars every day. And holy crap, I mean, that's impressive. But at the same time, you've already noticed the side effects and the cost of your strategy. You've already noticed, by the age of executive, you've had probably a couple of failed relationships, you've had disastrous conflicts, you've hit some major consequences of your blind spots, you've self-sabotaged, you've run yourself ragged, you've had burnout. So people already know the limits of their strategy. So when we describe it, and if I were to work with you, Vicky, it would be like, okay, cool. So you read your report. Which parts of it did you realize long ago? Which parts of this thing did you realize long ago as an overall reality strategy had certain costs and limitations? So also really appreciating you as somebody that's been on a journey and has had realizations. I'm not here to give you this insight from Mount Sinai of the Enneagram. I'm in engagement with you to say, okay, Vicky, was there anything that stood out for you and that you already realized long ago and have actually found some ease from? And talk about that. And then talk about what have been the side effects of an easing in that historical fixity that you used to need. So for me, one of the things I say most frequently in coaching sessions is that makes sense. That makes sense. So if someone says something terrible about themselves that they hate themselves for, that they just did, I say, no, it makes complete sense. That as a deployment, that person raging and telling the team they're freaking useless and need to catch a wake up, that's a completely understandable strategy to feeling like you're going to miss your deadline and your worth is at stake and you're going to be humiliated in front of critical stakeholders. So really validating that, but then also, talking with the client about, what are you feeling, about it? And then they will tell you about the costs of the strategy, and then start exploring, like Kathy was speaking about. One of the things I absolutely love about working with Tom Condon is he says things like, can you teach me how to do that? Can you teach me how to do Enneagram 8? When do you know that it's important to do it? When do you do it? And what is that type 8 strategy worried would happen if you didn't do it? And then we start working with the somatic experience of when does your type kick in? So when I work with corporate clients, I also work at that level. Like, when do you notice your 1-2-6 strategy kicking in? When do you notice your 7-8-3 kicking in? And then how do you hold that compulsion to, like, if you're an 8-3-7, like, fill the room, bring people along, depending on your subtype. But does that help at all, Vicky, in terms of working in this way? It's unshaming, and then the body.
Yeah, that's very, very clear. Thank you for walking us through that.
Pleasure. Pleasure. And then in terms of creating a tiny bit of heat, what I do, what Kathy was saying, a little bit of the flame, is I encourage people to do what I call safe to fail micro experiments. And I actually just put some together 5 minutes before this meeting started. And I'm going to share them with you in the chat as a special bonus. Let me put them in the chat. These are micro experiments for the different tri-types. The one thing, though, is some of them are not micro experiments. Some of them are frickin' hard. So what I do with my clients is I say a safe to fail micro experiment. It's got to be so small and so easy that it doesn't really matter if you don't do the whole thing. Like with Enneagram 2's clients, I sometimes say, can you think of a space in which it would be okay for you to say no? And they take ages to find one. They're like, because they're thinking of a big one. I say, what about the easiest possible one, the easiest imaginable in the lowest risk way? Oh, I could email that person in the procurement department and say to them, I'll be able to get back to you on Tuesday, instead of staying awake all night doing it. So they can just try a mini little no that isn't even a huge no, that isn't even an outright no, but there are a few conditions. I say you're not allowed to apologize for saying no. So just experimenting. So these are the safe to fail micro experimental suggestions that I created today. So 5, 6, 8. If you spot your tri-type here, maybe you can, when you see that thing, like if I look at the 4, 7, 9 one here, assert your needs and wants more firmly. That's a pretty horrific idea for me. I mean, as a 7, I can be quite pushy, but not in a way that's clear and assertive. To actually say it with some level of confidence. I rather just wangle away of getting what I want as a 7. So yeah, just looking at those. Let's start closing out since it's nearly time. I want to respect people's time. If you need to drop off, maybe put something in the chat, say goodbye. I'll hang around for a little bit longer just for our checkout. Who would like to say anything? I'd love to do a go around, but that's going to take a long time. Maybe put some what you're taking away in the chat, and then just check out with a word each. Who's ready? What are you feeling walking away? Claudia?
You can save me from chatting, typing in the chat. Thanks, Ingrid. That was really, really rich. And thanks so much for your sharing. I think I'm leaving just with that feeling of, again, just how important it is to create that sense of ease and safety and connection in sessions, and to start with that, and to really, really pay attention to what's happening in the room, and do my bit to co-regulate with my client and bring them into the space so that they can connect with themselves in an easy way, and strip away all the strategy and talk honestly.
Yes.
So conscious of how important that is. Yeah,
thank you. And absolutely no judgment, like zero. Just appreciation that this person has got such a brilliant strategy. Wow. It's just got some costs. So thank you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
So next, Miriam, looping right back to you. You kicked us off.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to re-listening. This was such a rich, provocative thinking about the somatic and the trauma and soma. Because it sticks together in many ways, and I'm just so grateful for being here and having you be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks so much for getting us into it. Appreciated what you shared. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Great. Anyone else want to pick out?
Yeah.
Susan.
Ingrid, always learning. Oh my gosh, so grateful. So incredibly great. And from the group. And takeaways, because it's again, the reminders and coming back to it. I appreciate, I think it was Carol talking about what her experience was with a traumatic coach, and coming back to that experience in the chart with you. I think that was really helpful to pull those two pieces together of, again, that embodiment and understanding what's going on. It's just that naming it and that awareness and coming back to it. One of the other big takeaways I had from today was that little trauma chart that you had, just naming all those things. I'm thinking, and the conversation with that, because that could be daily, just daily with a person, the little traumas that, and I'm thinking of some people, situations I'm dealing with, personal, family, clients, and things, of giving some more spaciousness to that person and that being, whether they're in an unhealthy level or whatever level. This is their reality. This is what they're going through. And not taking that on, it's just like in the field. So, and that will give me, again, that reminder of that capacity for me to be with that in a better and healthier way. So, thank you.
Because as coaches with the Enneagram, we think that we know how the person should be and what they're going to look like when they stop doing their time. And it's like the unhealthier the person is, the more judgmental we are and the more we think we've got the answer. Meantime, the more they're stuck in their type, the more trauma they had, and the more they needed that much rigidity. And it's being trauma informed with the Enneagram is a totally different way of working. Yeah.
It feels like it's like this web, right? It's an intertwined, it's a webbing of the trauma and the body and the circumstance, and it isn't like one.
Yep.
It's none of that. It's a webbing. I keep wanting to draw something on that.
Yes.
In terms of how it is. Yeah.
So I'm putting there in the chat, NAM, Hilla and Kama. NAM is the neuroaffective relational model. And when you're looking for web, that is just the most fantastic system to explore. That was where
great.
my trauma training, and that's where everything that I teach in my Enneagram and trauma course that kind of is an elaboration of what this little sample that you got today is mostly from and then all the other ones related to that, like Bessel van der Kolk and Peter Levine and Pat Ogden and whatever. But NAM is a really, really powerful understanding of that web. And in NAM, there are 5 survival styles, and they map pretty well to the 9 Enneagram types. It's just that in NAM, the way that Hella articulates them, there's quite a bit of overlap between 1 and 6. And there's quite a lot of overlap between 3 and 8. So he's pretty much nailed it on a lot of them, and some of them combine. But if you're interested in trauma, the body, and the development of personality, there's a book called Healing Developmental Trauma by Lawrence Heller. And there is a workbook, a Healing Developmental Trauma workbook that they wrote together, Hella and Kama. Absolutely fantastic resources. And there's some Lawrence Heller talking on YouTube as well.
What on YouTube?
Lawrence Heller from NAM.
Okay, great, terrific. Yeah, I've been studying trauma for a long time, but now that I'm studying that, it feels like it keeps moving like that. Yeah.
So, the more I study trauma, development, and defensive strategies, the more I understand Enneagram and bounding initiative.
Thank you. I gotta go. Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you so much. Most appreciated.
Such a pleasure.
All right. Have a great evening. My day, your evening.
Day. Cheers, Moon.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Ingrid.
Well, bye, guys.